I hope you guys all enjoyed your weekend. And as Jake already said, we are getting to enjoy Christmas a little early, which is never a bad thing to get to enjoy it a little bit early. But I think the thing that I love most about Advent is that for thousands of years, the church calendar was designed that even though Christmas comes every year, those church leaders knew that we needed that time to be reminded and remember and prepare our hearts and our minds and our soul for the amazing gift that Jesus is. So that was built into our calendar because we are creatures that constantly need to be reminded. Because I don't know about you, but if there's anyone else in this room, I know I would have a complete panic if my Google Calendar all of a sudden just vanished. I'd have a panic. Or if I don't take my shopping list to the store with me, I tend to buy either way too much or I completely forget something that I'm supposed to buy. And in fact, many of us even wear these smartwatches on our wrists now that not so subtly remind us that, hey, you've been sitting a long time, maybe you should get up and take a few steps. We have so much going on in our daily lives and those little things that consume our lives that it can be really easy to forget the why behind the big things in our life. So while it may seem a little cliche to do a whole sermon on thankfulness and gratitude on Thanksgiving weekend, I really don't know if there's really a more appropriate time to really set aside and talk about what that thankfulness and gratitude means in our faith than on a weekend where we as a country really focus on thankfulness. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump right in because there are countless references to thankfulness and gratitude in the Bible, and one of the most recognizable is Psalms 100. And it's 5 short verses, and it's commonly known as the Psalm of Thanksgiving. And fun fact, the old 100th Psalm tune was played during Queen Elizabeth II's coronation ceremony in 1953. And here are what the verses say. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him. Bless his name. For the Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations. So imagine this song playing as a whole country rallies around a new leader, or there is a baby being baptized, or someone just feels on the top of the world, on the mountaintop with joy and gratitude. And what I love about this imagery is that it's not only the people of the world that are singing in this joy, but everything in the world, from the rocks to the air itself, is singing and praising the Lord. Is there a time that you can remember just being on that mountaintop and just being filled with that joy and just feeling like everything is just kind of singing around you? Because I know for me and my family, we've kind of been in that season as we have moved from Independence to Blue Springs, which is nothing like moving when you're about 5 or 6 months pregnant. That seems to be the time that everyone decides that would be the great time to move. But as we were going through the motions of trying to decide if we were going to place a bid on a house, and we had only seen 2 houses, and then we found this house that we really liked in Blue Springs. So we started to make the to-do list of all the things we needed to do, of, we need to put in a good offer, and hopefully we get a good deal, and we'll need to start packing, and we'll need to put our current house on the market. And as we were kind of making this to-do list, it was actually my husband, Kyle, who said, I really think we need to pause, and we really need to pray and think about this before we just start doing all the motions and we just start working on this. So one Sunday after church, we loaded up and we went to this new neighborhood and we did a prayer walk. So for part of it, we were walking and we were talking, and then for part of it, we were just silent and praying individually. And for as long as I can remember, water has had a really big part in my faith. And I always feel closest to God when I'm either on a lake or I can hear the waves of the ocean in the background. And there's this little pond in this new neighborhood, and it has a trail that goes all the way around it with benches. And so we decided to take a seat and take a little break and continue praying. And as we were sitting there, I was just filled with this peace and joy. And I turned to Kyle and I said, I can just see it. I can see our kids riding bikes and scooters around this pond someday, and I can just see our life happening here. And I really think this is the house for us. And he said, I was thinking the same thing. Also, a little side note is that Kyle and I have kept a dream book or list ever since we got married. And it involves big things about our faith and big accomplishments we want to have in our careers. But it also has smaller things like trip destinations we'd like to take or just things we'd like to do in life that would bring us joy. And one of the things that's been on that list ever since we got married was something that I wrote, that someday I want us to own a lake house so I can drink my coffee and read my Bible while looking out at the water. And God reminded us of that dream that day we were sitting around the pond and on our prayer walk, because this is now the view from our kitchen where I actually wrote this sermon. We were definitely feeling the words that appear in verse 5. For the Lord is good, his steadfast love endures forever. However, while I'm so thankful that God reminded us to pause and take that moment of thankfulness and gratitude before we moved forward with a decision, I was also reminded of all the times in my life when I don't pause and when I don't take that time to show gratitude. Like whenever we're having a house full of people and I get so consumed with making sure that everything's perfect and everything is just right and everyone's happy, and then all of a sudden I look up and everyone's left. Or whenever we get together with friends that we haven't seen for a really long time, and then we get back in the car and we go, wow, that was really fun. Hopefully we get to do that again sometime. But did we really show our gratitude for those friendships? Author Peter Leithart, in his book Gratitude, an Intellectual History, showcases how gratitude has changed through civilizations, and specifically how it changed when Jesus and Christian teachings entered the world. He explains that humans automatically respond in thankfulness. Our hormones and our adrenaline kick in, and we can't help but have happiness and joy and relief. Gratitude, on the other hand, is something we must learn how to integrate into our lives, and is more than a feeling but requires action. Another way he puts this is that unexpressed gratitude is experienced as ingratitude. Unexpressed gratitude is experienced as ingratitude. And we all know what this feels like, right? We go out of our way to help someone. We try and do something nice for someone, and we don't get any gratitude, or maybe not even a simple thanks in return. And while we didn't do that nice thing to receive gratitude, it can become really easy to then start questioning ourselves and go, maybe they took that wrong. If they didn't say thank you, maybe I offended them somehow, or maybe I did something wrong by doing that. Or maybe we just feel like we're not that valued if there's no gratitude. Gratitude can work the same with God. Because are we taking time in our prayer life to truly thank God for the things in our life and our world? Are we spending time remembering the good? Or are we always focusing on the next thing we need and concern or worry that is creeping into our mind? Because God wants to be a safe place that we can come with our worries, our concerns, our fears, our desires. But God deserves praise and gratitude. Because what type of friendship would be super fun if all the conversations revolved around them, what's going on in their lives, everything that they need, and what you need to do in order to make their life better? It might not be a friendship that you really enjoy getting to spend your time with. Gratitude is training ourselves to take time to pause in our ultra fast-paced world. And in the moment, take the time to show God our gratitude. And this can be super simple. This can be as simple as taking 30 seconds when you're with friends or family, maybe you're sitting around the table, and kind of just pull back and just say a simple prayer to yourself, thanking for all the people that are there and the food that you're about to eat. Or maybe just keeping a journal right by your bed, and the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning is just write down 3 things that you're thankful for to start off your day. However we choose to express it, the important thing is to take the time with God and with those around us so they don't just feel it, but our actions show how grateful we are for the role that they play in our lives. In fact, I would challenge us that verse 4 in Psalms 5 says, "Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise." And we already know that Pastor Aaron talks about how we should pray at least 5 times a day, once when we wake up in the morning, the 3 meals, and before we go to bed. But let's take that one step further in how we should pray. Because gratitude is what jump-starts our prayer life, renews our faith, and inspires others about God's possibilities rather than human impossibilities. So what if every time we entered into prayer, every time we jumped into this conversation with God, we started with gratitude? Think of how many more possibilities and God's power we could be reminded of instead of focusing on our own worries, concerns, and limitations. Now, I know that for some of us in the room, or maybe some people online, we spent a lot of time talking about all the things that is good that God is doing. But I know that there's probably some of us that are going, yeah, it's really hard for me to see God's goodness and see that gratitude right now in this season of life. Maybe you're struggling to afford that picture-perfect meal on the table and presents under the tree. Or maybe work is super stressful right now and overbearing, and it's hard to turn it off when you get home at the end of the day, so you're just filled with stress and anxiety. Or maybe when you think about some of your holiday traditions, there's somebody really important who's not going to be there this year. The great thing about the Psalms is that they were primarily written by David, and when they were entered into the Bible, they were entered to be a guide of how we are supposed to live out our faith. However, we don't necessarily know what David was going through when he wrote Psalms 100. He could have been on the mountaintop, singing out of pure joy of something amazing that God has done in his life. But what if David was in the valley of his life? Perhaps he was sitting in one of those moments when it's hard to see God's goodness. It was hard to see God working in his life, and he needed to be reminded of the promises that God sends us, even when life gets hard. And he wrote these words. Because the great thing about the Psalms is that they meet us where we are. They validate our emotions, but more importantly, they speak to our soul. So what if instead of singing a joyful noise, the only sound that the psalmist could make at this time was a whisper of a prayer? Let's hear these verses again with that in mind. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness and come into his presence with singing. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him, bless his name. For the Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations. I think we often associate gratitude and thanksgiving with happiness and joy. But perhaps even more profound is that we worship a God who understands our suffering, sees our pain, and provides us a promise that regardless of the shadows that we are facing in our lives, God's love is bright enough to make a way for us, even if it only feels like a crack or sounds like a whisper. We all have seasons of deep mourning in our lives. And however, mourning doesn't just mean sad or depressed, which are real human emotions that need to be acknowledged. But here's one way to look at mourning. Mourning is being moved deeply in one's gut to see the world through your tears in a new way, longing for things to be different. And I love this definition because I can feel it in my soul. Because the world looks different once we are mourning. The grief can become lighter over time, but those tears forever change the way that we look at the world. They can make us fearful and make us worried about everything that's coming next and force us to look inward. Or they can help provide clarity on what's most important and help us to look outward, beyond ourselves. So prior to coming to Woods Chapel, I had taken on an internship at KU Medical Center in their chaplaincy program. And it was a 12-week program where we learned how to take care and how to care for patients and the KU medical staff and family members of patients that were going through some of the worst days of their lives. And as an intern, one of our responsibilities is that once a week, I would be the only chaplain in the whole hospital for one evening shift a week from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., which meant anytime anyone requested a chaplain, there was an emergency in the emergency department, or there was a code, it would come to our pager, and I would literally run through the hallways of KU in our little blue coats that designated us as chaplains. And I probably have hundreds of stories from just my 12 short weeks in this program, things that I like to think helped families and patients in their time, and things that, since I have grown in my own faith and my own understanding, that I wish I maybe handled a little bit differently. But there were two things that stand out to me as the most profound about my time at KU. First was how humbled I was that people that had never met me welcomed me to be with them in some of the worst moments of their life. And two, how sacred those moments of deep grieving truly were. I was in the room with multiple people as they held the hand of their loved ones who took their final breaths. Some of them were more expected and peaceful than others. But even in the most traumatic and unexpected and shocking experiences, there was still this moment when the whole room would slow down, pause, and you could almost just feel this peace and hope stirring in the room, even in unimaginable grief. And maybe you've been in a situation or a room similar to that, or you've heard similar stories. But regardless if you've experienced this for yourself, this is what I believe when I read the words in Psalms, that whatever it is we are grieving right now or grieving in the future, it is because of Jesus that we are free to sing the praises found in Psalms 100 in the midst of all circumstances. Because only Jesus could turn our mourning into dancing, and Jesus understands the depths of our suffering and the hope that is stirring within us. So how can we show gratitude in these moments? And I think the simple answer is show up. Show up in our prayer time, approach God with our mourning, sing the songs of Psalms 100 even when we are in the valley, because God still has one more move. Grief, sadness, and mourning will not have the final say, but love, grace, and peace always wins. God's love endures forever. But then once we show up and God has changed how we see the world through our tears, then it means we are to work towards being that love, grace, and peace in the world for people to see. And it might look different for all of us. It might mean grieving for lonely people in nursing homes, or it could be hoping to see addicts recover from their addictions, or yearning for people everywhere to have access to food, water, and shelter for their babies and families. But instead of sitting in grief, gratitude means being moved in such a way that we intend to do something about it. So I don't know where you are today. I don't know if you're on a mountaintop lately or if you're in one of the valleys. Maybe it depends on the day. But regardless of where you are, there is a great reminder for all of us found in chapter 13 of the Gospel of John. Jesus wraps a towel around himself and begins to wash the feet of the disciples. He doesn't ask them to clean up first. He doesn't ask them to prepare, and he doesn't ask for anything in return. Instead, he accepts them how they are, with literal proof of everywhere that they have been on their feet, and washes them, meeting them where they are on their journey. So no matter where you are in your journey, whether you are broken and beaten, or maybe you just had a pedicure, Jesus is coming alongside you and washing your feet, helping to prepare you for the next leg of your journey, because we know that God always has the last move. As we close today, we're going to hear one of my very favorite songs, and it's called Gratitude, which seems very fitting for today, and perfectly reflects how we can show our gratitude to God, even when we do not feel like we have much to offer, even when we read Psalms more as a promise that we cling to than praise, even when we have dirty feet. Our hallelujah is enough. So I invite you to stay seated during this time while Matt sings this song and reflect and allow God to speak to us, because hope is stirring within each of us. We just have to be willing to see it, and then we have to be willing to be it out in the world.